All right, JT, you just passed the PMP. How do you feel, man?
I feel very happy and very relieved that it's done and it went well.
Yeah, that's good. You did really, really well. That's awesome. So,
Mhm.
what's the basic story? What's like the condensed version, man? Like, how did you get here?
Uh, Started specifically for the PMP. Started last year, middle of last year. Applied the PMI, got the approval that I could go for the exam, and thought, logical step, buy the PMP, or sorry, buy the PMBOK guide, and
Yeah.
just go cover to cover multiple times. Get to the point where I knew the granularity of that process so intimately that I could, go through any exam and be fine. So I kind of did it. I got probably halfway through it, took a mock test, just absolutely ruined it. It was, my score was terrible. And I thought, this is not an effective way of doing this. So I kind of put it on hold.
Mhm.
And initially I thought, if I find a better solution for learning, then I would chase that. And, like I was saying, I did a PM course probably 5 years ago. Most of that was online, a lot
Yeah.
of reading content, writing, and tests, and just didn't find it very effective. The last module I took in class with Matt, who's a coach in this program, by pure coincidence, and I found that class to be hugely beneficial and came away learning, the content at a much higher degree than any of the other modules. I thought that would be the environment that I would need to pursue down the road if I pursue my PMP. Seemed to forget that theory, and then eventually reminded myself of it. And then this course came up here beginning of this year, so dove into it there at the end of April.
That's awesome, dude. And obviously, you did well. Like, how good did you do in the test?
I was right in the middle of the above target. So I actually, I think I passed quite comfortably, which made me feel really good.
Yeah, that is good, man. So that's awesome. Hold on, I'm getting a call. And so that's awesome. So you said like interactive environment and stuff, and you did like the online version. Like you went through it. Like, how did you get the online? How did the interactiveness go with like the online version? Because it's just me talking to you. Like,
I could see that being. No, that's an interesting question. I think people probably don't think that watching videos is interactive, but I just found that the videos themselves interactive in nature, like how you deliver the content. I found that interactive regardless of whether you and I actually had active dialogue. I just felt like I was in a room with you, were talking at me, and I didn't have the luxury of being able to pose a live question to you, but I just found that the passion and delivery and that model worked really well for me. And I like I was saying, couple of days in, or I guess you stretched over a couple of weeks, but I was a couple of days of content into that program. I thought, we haven't really delved into detail yet. I'm not really sure if I'm getting enough that would translate onto the exam. And said to myself, no, that like I looked at the titles of the different stages, the kind of waterfall made easy, and then the waterfall deep dive, and I said, no, I got to at least get to these stages and go through that and see how I feel on the back of that. And like I said, like even doing waterfall made easy, I came out of that with a significantly higher level of understanding than I did reading the PMBOK guide page after page. And we hadn't even got to the point where we were going down to the individual processes, the ITOs that go into it. So after that one section, I was like, man, this is definitely going to be more effective, and I want to see it through. So
That's good. I mean, it's an interesting perspective, because I think the world is like led to believe or whatever. It's just reasonable, I guess, that like, oh, I got to go into every single detail, and that's the way that it's going to come together. I mean, it's a little bit like building an engine, and like, oh, I got to break it all apart and look at all the pieces. And you're like, dude, if you're going to have just a bunch of pieces on the floor, you're not going to have an engine anymore. Like. So like the science behind it, like for me, I don't know if it's science, but it's the logic that I use, is like, as a dude that used to have to work on engine, like if I can understand the subsystems inside the engine and how they work together, then I can understand like why they exist. And then if I want to get down into like, oh, the fuel pump, then I can understand the pieces of the fuel pump. But if I start with the pieces of the fuel pump, I just get dirty hands and confused. That's kind of how it works. The thought.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like even in my project management world that I exist in today, like, I'm not an engineer by trade, so I don't have the technical knowledge of every aspect of building. I work in energy here in Calgary, so everything to do with building a facility in the oil and gas industry. But I'm around people and work collaboratively with the people that have that knowledge base. So it's really being, knowing enough to be effective in the right moments. And essentially, it's the same concept, like knowing enough, relying on your own experiences, being a project manager, and applying the situational based learning was what I think propelled me on a path where I really felt like I was absorbing stuff, and it was making me think more and more about each of the different topics. How do I apply it today? Do I apply it today? Would it be something that I would use tomorrow? We're going through the question templates, and even just the first stage after you've read the first set, the question they're actually asked you, then the content is what would you do? Never really took that approach to learning, because quite a lot of the time, like, I actually wouldn't be aligned with an answer, but it was good to just be thought-provoking, because I think on the back of that is, hopefully it will make me a better project manager, because there is a process that I can follow, and there's some learnings when you go through the answers. You realize what the right answer is, and you go, oh, I actually don't do that. There'd be value in me doing that now going forward. So that's something else that I took away from it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and like you brought up a good point, like in the process, we're like having you stop, or like when I said, like, how can I get these students to retain the stuff as most, is what I see. And I don't know if you experienced this. It sounded like you followed the process, which is what I recommend. Follow the process. Like, it's not bad. It's like they just race, like shoot through it. And like, it's almost like they're not there as a person. Like they give up themselves. And I'm like, dude, stop discounting yourself. Like, JT, smart guy, use your brain. Like, what would you do? And so, yeah, that's good that you picked that up and you actually tried it, because, yeah, like you're a good project manager. Do you think that like now you have some different skills that you're like, oh, I can be a little bit better at my job, or at least, navigate a little bit differently or anything?
Yeah, 100%. To be honest, when I went into that learning environment, I didn't really want to. I guess initially, selfishly, I thought, what can I get as quick as I can to pass the exam? Which I'm sure a lot of people have the same.
It's
approach.
called a 7-day accelerator. I get a lot of people that want to go fast. Yes.
But I mean, I think, whether directly or indirectly, like as you go through the waterfall methodology and even the agile stuff, because in the environment I work in, we don't really use any of those methodologies. So even looking at saying, wow, there's an application for some of that stuff, albeit in a hybrid model. It's stuff that we don't consider because no one really has that agile training here. But even when you go through the traditional waterfall sense, you look at either the rigidity that the structure gives you, or the flexibility in that you can pick and choose tools. And then you look and go, I don't even like, you don't have to be in a hugely complex project, and a risk register has huge value. Like, at least formalizing it in some sort of template might be different to just having conversations with people and that knowledge being lost as soon as the conversation ends. Like, but getting it down, putting the trackability around it throughout a project, the stakeholder engagement stuff as well. Like, I think that it's something personally I could definitely leverage off that going forward. So after a while, it unofficially became, there's a lot of this that I think I'm going to be able to apply after, assuming that I pass the test, that could make me be a better project manager. So yeah, no, for sure, it was kind of two-pronged.
That's awesome, dude. And I think that's right. Like you take from it, like you put yourself into it. And you're like, oh, I can use a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and season your game, get a little bit better. Now, I think there's probably people out there like you that's like, hey, well, just want to get through quickly. I want to do it. I got things going on. Do you think there's a wrong way to do this? Like a wrong way to PMP?
Yeah, I did it last year. I picked the PMBOK guide up and read it cover to cover. It just like, I'm sure there are a few people out there that could read it and absorb it all. But I think what you miss then is the application aspect of it. Like, the case study like videos throughout the learning. Like, you can watch a video on content, move immediately onto another video about content, get halfway through it, and suddenly realize that you've pretty much already forgotten the video before. So I just found that going through the full process, spending the time to, because you could easily just go, you did the 14 steps, you broke it down, there were case stories throughout. You could easily just skip over them and just go content. But I actually found a lot of value in just going through the user story. It's not a huge amount of time extra, but for me, it just visualized the concepts that we just talked about. And then you finish that off with some questions to kind of close the loop on that that specific area and then move on to the next. Like, I think if you try to rush through and just say, you know, this 7-day accelerator is great because it condenses what I should learn in 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, I can plow through it in 7 days. I think if you rush it, you could miss some of the value in the situational learning environment. I think, like, you got to take the time. If you've done a bunch of studying before and you've got a strong knowledge base, this is a very good tool to sharpen you up for an exam. Even if you just watch the exam endurance stuff, or when you went through the types of questions, like I found a lot of value in, you know, the question of 1,000 faces, the typewriter, gold, fool's gold. Like, none of that stuff I would have got reading the PMBOK, or even sort of the conventional learning material where you just, they may condense the material itself. Like, just going into the exam, knowing that someone's gone through it and try to break it down into some, you know, logical chunks, and then also, you know, things to look out for, you know, even right down to sort of, if you're having tech problems, like, this is the plan. Like, I you know, I didn't really give a lot of credit to that until I got to that stage of the process and thought, you know, actually just having those numbers written down and having a plan in terms of the dialogue to use, just one less thing to think about, right? Like, you know, you get in that exam situation, something happens, you don't want at that point to be trying to figure out what the right and wrong thing is to say, or, you know, the number that you need to call. Like, I just think giving people a little bit of guidance on all the kind of specific elements of the exam, in addition to just content, for me, it was hugely valuable.
I appreciate it, dude. And I think that's right. Like, and in the way, so from like an agile standpoint, like, obviously I broke away from, I don't even care how these other people teach, they're bad at their job. But like, yeah, having those things and thinking about it is super important. And like, all that was inspired by like learning more and more and doing more agile, to be like, am I listening to the customer? Am I listening to the students? Because like the other use, like all those things with like the exam, like what happened? Who do I call if it glitches out? It's like, lady called me crying, I don't know who to call. And I'm like, I don't know who to call either. It's like, I'll figure it out. And then might as well standardize it. And then like, let's talk about the question solving stuff for a little bit. Like, you said some things like, question with 1,000 faces, typewriter stuff, like full gold or no gold, or I made it up, gold or fool's gold. What are those things like, and how did they help you? Like, because that sounds crazy to me.
I think that like the biggest ones that I found were that I actually used, like in an application sense in the exam, that actually came up. The question of 1,000 faces, so all change based stuff. You know, I think you were probably bang on with your 20 to 30 questions that had change involved in it. I was concentrating on other things at the time, but I think that was roughly around roughly around how many questions it was. So, you know, I just like the comfort level of you read the question, you know, and then you see the trigger word change. And then for me, it was almost like a kind of, you know, a deep breath of relaxation. It was like, oh, okay, like I know the guidance on this question. Like, I know what to look for before I even start to go through the 4 answers. So in my mind, you know, anything that doesn't have change in it, likely I'm going to look at it and go, okay, you know, or I know where to focus the effort. And for me, I think that was probably one of the big values there, was just focused effort, like, you know, very quickly, because obviously you're on time constraints, is where to focus. So that was one of the tips that I really liked. And then the other one was sort of trigger words, like the bads and the good. So
the good words, yeah.
The one that came up, you know, probably 4 or 5 times was when I was looking at an answer that I liked the look of. You know, I was going through each one and analyzing it, whether I liked it or not, and then suddenly clicked that I think it was probably 4 times the answer that I liked had the word try in it.
Yeah.
Try to do, you know, this, or, and then I suddenly was like, oh no, that's not it. And it was already down to sort of, it was this one or it was that one. So just, you know, straight away I knew, well, it's got to be that one. And felt very confident as soon as I remembered, oh, that's the words to be wary of, you know, this is the direction to go. So I felt as I was getting close to the exam, and I used the PMP simulator that's on the online, on the website there, and more and more confident applying. So I did the content stuff, and then I really tried to focus on those specific advices when I was reading questions. And then it started to pay dividends in the mock test, where I was starting to see some of the questions I was getting wrong earlier in a different type of question, but similar environment, I was getting them right because I was just remembering, one word to look out for. So those were hugely beneficial, and something that I've not actually seen before. Like I've never really seen the content built alongside the how to actually look at it, what to look out for. It's just that extra level of guidance in the exam environment. Just I found that for me, it helped a lot.
Yeah, I made him up. You can't find him anywhere else. I just made him up. So yeah, no, but it's like the cool part is I'm glad you looked at it, and like to me, you were thinking diligently through this. Like it's very apparent that you were like using the tools, like reflecting them off the questions to see like what words am I seeing, how are they framing it out, does it make sense to me, and you were like having those feedback loops and learning, and then that, and if we can do that over and over, then the game's over. Like you win.
For sure. Yeah, I think
Simple.
that even the structure, the way to read the question. I've done a few multiple choice exams across my kind of education, and that's the first time that's ever been sort of explained to me in detail as well. Like the course actually, there's dedicated videos to each of the stages and why it's important and how to do it. Even that, I think, probably paid a lot of dividends in the exam, because I'm sure the quantity of questions I probably would have got wrong purely because I didn't read it properly. And it's a long exam, like 4 hours to try and stay focused and read the detail is a challenge. And I think if you've got a standardized approach to do it, it helps a lot. Like focus on what it's asking and then spend the time above it. I think that and I think I finished with about 20-ish minutes left.
Oh really?
And part of me was, should I go back through it? But I every question I was like, okay, there were actually questions when I got sort of a couple hours in where I accidentally started reading the top and then had to suddenly stop, and I actually literally stopped reading and went back, started with the question and then started reading again. So I actually felt at the end, I thought, no, you've been strict in terms of how to approach the question, so be confident. And I hit submit, and I'm sure everybody goes, and then it comes up with your result and that. So yeah,
that's it. That's good, dude. Yeah, I'm glad that you were strict. Like and we're very, very strict inside, and in a good way. It's like if you smile and you're outgoing and nice and stuff, you can be strict. Like it's like no, like we're gonna do it this way. And so yeah, paid. That's awesome. So at the end of the day, like what's next for you? Like you did this, like I'm interested career wise.
Career wise, I mean, we're hopefully energy is coming back, and we'll have some bigger projects to do. So probably, day one is to look at where the concepts and some of the tools and techniques that I learned through this process can be of value today. Cool. A couple other people here have done PMPs in the past, but prior to 2021, so very much on that waterfall structure. So we've already discussed this morning, they were kind of giving kudos and stuff for passing and saying like it'd be nice to look at the agile side of
there might be things that you can apply. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and it's interesting because initially I thought, well, it can't because we're so engineering based and regulatory drives so much of what we do. But then I thought, well, that's probably there were even questions in the exam that were sort of based on that and saying, well, how would you get around, like how would you manage the risks appropriately? Senior leaders have concerns about how agile could be applied in this type of industry. And so we've already agreed that we're going to sit down and discuss, what concepts, what types of projects could we potentially reap some of the benefits of that methodology. So that'll be interesting to see. I think.
Yeah, I mean, let me know how it goes, because I mean, even at the like philosophical level about like how you communicate and who's involved and how assignments are made and like the feedback loops and things like that, and setting those things up. It may not be strict agile or something like that, but I think, I don't know how many big projects you've worked, I worked at, like it's weeks until you find out that people don't like what you're doing or different things. So yeah, I mean, I'm interested to see what you guys come up with.
Yeah, you think about people, in agile, people over process. And I think about some of the processes that we have here and think, if we put the emphasis more on the people, what would be the outcome. And I think there's a few things, short term, that I think that there could be some real benefit there for sure. I do plan to not read anything for a few weeks, just enjoy the weather now. Happy to.
Yeah,
It's
it looks beautiful.
It's great
there.
seeing you every night on my laptop, on the videos and stuff. But, take a little break from learning, I think, and hang out for the summer.
Yeah, well, have fun. All right, man. Well, I really, really am proud of how you did. You did amazingly. So last thing for people out there, maybe they've like tried to get halfway through the PMBOK and just gave up or something like that. What would be your final advice for those people to get back on it and be smiling like you at the end?
I think take a philosophy that you probably take out of project management in terms of leveraging subject matter experts. We touch on that through the process. I think you've got SME specifically around project management, the PMP, how to approach the exam, how to approach retaining the content, how to learn it. I think take the same philosophy. Don't sit reading a book and trying to digest it. I think collaborate with the people that have already done it for you. And I think for me, I think it was about 6 weeks ish was sort of total study time. And, that's quite a bit less than the time I spent last year reading the book, and I didn't even get halfway through it. And, I think after probably a week or so, I really started to feel that I was gaining traction. And then once you pick up momentum through the course, I just found that I was on a really, really good, onward trajectory in terms of absorbing the content and really feeling confident, and then sort of tying that in with the questions. And I had your podcast on the drive to work, which was a nice combination of learning in the evenings, and then the next morning, a bit more about things to consider when approaching the exam. And I just don't think you get that from just reading a book. I think just getting the different perspectives, getting someone that's trying to understand how to approach the exam, or has already understood how to approach the exam and is just trying to pass that knowledge on to you. I think that this program does that. So I think for someone that's thinking reading something cover to cover is the way to go, I would say give it a chance, because I think once you get into it and you really start to test your capability through mock tests and stuff, you'll really start to see that the process works. And that's what I would kind of conclude from going through the course and then ultimately taking the exam.
That's awesome, key takeaway. Well, I really, really appreciate you did amazing. I'm sad that you're gone, but it's good that you're passing. You can enjoy the nice outside. So if there's anything else I can do to help you out, man, you know how to find me, and let me know how the Agile stuff, the application goes of the processes. And let's talk again soon, and great job.
Wicked, man. Appreciate it. Thank you very much for everything.
Yes, sir.